All right, let's jump into another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at the silver update report that came out on Tuesday, April 8th.
Okay.
And the reason I wanted to look at this with you is to really try to understand, like, what are the short-term price movements in silver and what might be coming up next.
Right.
So, as always, we'll try to pull out the key insights here so you can really see what's going on without getting too bogged down in the details.
Sounds good.
So, kicking things off, this silver update report, what does it say about what happened to silver prices on Tuesday, April 8th?
Well, it looks like Tuesday was a day of consolidation for silver. Basically, if you look at a 15-minute chart, the price just kind of stayed in a narrow range,
Okay.
specifically between the third resistance level,
Huh.
which is also called R3,
Got it.
and the central pivot point. You can kind of think of R3 as like a ceiling where you tend to see some selling pressure.
Okay.
And this kind of sideways movement, it often happens after, price has fallen and then had a little bit of a recovery.
Right.
So it's almost like the market's like taking a pause.
Yeah, taking a breather.
Mhm.
So, all right, what about today, Wednesday? What does the report say about, like, the most likely scenario?
Well, it seems like an upward breakout is pretty probable on Wednesday.
Okay.
They think silver could move up towards that R4 resistance level
Okay.
on that 15-minute chart again.
Mhm.
So that's another kind of ceiling, but a little bit higher. And actually, this upward move, it might even test like R3 or R4 if you look at the 1-hour chart.
Oh, wow. Okay. So potentially a pretty decent push upwards. But what about after that? Because markets, they rarely just go straight up, right?
Right, exactly. The report, it actually outlines two possibilities for what might happen after that initial climb.
Yeah.
So first, silver finds some stability and kind of trades sideways, but above that 15-minute R4 level.
Okay.
The second possibility is that it reverses and, it starts to decline.
Yeah.
And if that happens, the hourly chart suggests it might drop down to around the S3 support level.
Gotcha. So a support level is kind of like a floor, right?
Exactly. A level where you often see buyers stepping in.
Okay. That makes sense. Now, the report, it really stresses this one factor, the Dow Jones Index.
Yeah.
Why is that so important for silver?
Well, the report's really emphasizing that the Dow's performance can really influence what happens with silver.
Mm.
So if we see the Dow Jones weakening again, that could really put some downward pressure on silver prices.
Okay.
But on the flip side, if the Dow can at least stay somewhat stable, then that upward move in silver, it becomes more likely.
Okay.
And I think it has to do with just like the overall sentiment in the market, like are investors feeling risk averse?
Right, right. Okay, so with all this potential for ups and downs, what's the most likely thing to happen today, Wednesday, according to the report?
Well, they're saying the most probable scenario is that initial move up towards R4
Uh-huh.
and then a pullback down towards S3. And this is all like on those 15-minute charts.
Got it.
So they're kind of expecting this quick rise and then a little dip.
Short-term volatility. All right, so short-term, it seems like a lot depends on the Dow, but what about like the longer-term view? What does the report say about the next month or two?
Yeah, so for the longer term, they actually seem pretty positive on silver, at least for the next month or two.
Okay.
But there's a big but here. This positive outlook really depends on the Dow Jones Index staying relatively stable.
Okay.
And the key level they're watching for the Dow is its S4 support level
Got it.
on the weekly chart.
Okay, so it's kind of like a weekly floor for the Dow.
Exactly.
But I remember there was something in the report, right, about the Dow being in kind of a precarious position.
Yeah, that's right. They're a little bit worried that the Dow is showing some signs of, potentially breaking down.
Hmm.
And if that happens, if it can't hold that weekly S4 support level and it drops down towards like S5,
Yeah.
that could be really bad news for silver.
Oh.
They think that might lead to silver gradually declining and maybe even heading down towards the S3 support level on the daily chart.
Wow. Okay. So next month, we could see a whole different story for silver if the Dow doesn't cooperate.
Right, exactly.
So a lot of short-term uncertainty tied to the Dow and then a longer-term positive outlook that's also dependent on the Dow. So what's the final word? What does the report actually recommend people do?
Well, they're basically advising caution.
Okay.
With all this uncertainty in the short term and silver's dependence on the Dow, they think it's best to wait for a clearer signal
Okay.
before making any new investment decisions. So basically, patience is key right now.
All right. So be patient, watch the Dow. and then we'll see what happens with silver. So to sum it all up, short term, we could see silver bouncing around a bit,
Right.
probably starting with that move up and then maybe a little dip. And of course, keep an eye on the Dow Jones because that seems to be driving things right now.
Yeah, for sure.
Longer term, things are looking a bit more optimistic for silver, but again, that all hinges on the Dow holding its ground. So it really makes you wonder, if the Dow is so important for silver, what other, seemingly unrelated economic indicators might give us some clues about silver's future? What do you think?
That's a good question.
Definitely something to think about. Anyway, thanks for diving into this silver update report with me.
Anytime.
It's been really insightful.
Glad to help.